Also, I have to start like now. Oh my god, I feel like if I'm like thrown into the deep. Hi, I'm Shari Petti. I am a filmmaker, and today I'll be reviewing The 13th by Ava DuVernay. So for me, I really love Ava's approach to documentary filmmaking because, I mean, she takes a lot of these very dense topics that, might be difficult for people to understand or might be difficult for people to read and puts it into a concise, palatable film that, I think is something that we definitely need because not everyone, is into books. Not everyone could digest a lot of this information.
We are the products of the history that our ancestors chose.
I really enjoyed the soundtrack that she used. She used like some of my favorite musicians. She used Nina Simone, Common, Nas. And for me, that was a really great way to not only keep us interested because they came at strategic points. After a major point was made, we had a break so our minds could process things and really come to terms with what we just heard and relax for a little bit over some music that had relevance in terms of being in line with the documentary and prison reform and black people in America. A lot of these songs were in line with that.
Products of that set of choices that we have to understand in order to escape from it.
And let's head right in.
1 out of 4 human beings with their hands on bars, shackled, in the world are locked up here in the land of the free.
America has 5% of the world population, but houses 25% of the global prison population, which is insane, and it starts off like that, and it really lets you know what we're going to get into and why that statistic is so insane. And she does not disappoint throughout the entire documentary.
The 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes it unconstitutional for someone to be held as a slave.
Statistics. A lot of things being thrown out at you, but the use of animation was something that kept me intrigued because some of the images that I saw that were animated, I still remember them right now. That was a really great way to bring that across as opposed to just having interviewees speak for like hours about a topic that is so dense. So a lot of the interviews were set in spaces that looked like a prison. They were kind of contained or had like brick walls or had like, wire poles and, anything to replicate being trapped and being in prison. And I think that was a really good touch and a good addition to, attention to detail when it comes to portraying this story and letting people know what this documentary is about. I feel like you could watch stills from this documentary and figure out, this is probably about, prison or anything about being trapped. Another thing that stood out to me is how unbiased the panel was. Like, it wasn't just a panel of black people or Latino people. And also within the panel, people with different levels of qualifications, from those with PhDs to people who were on-the-ground activists. The 13th is about the 13th Amendment, but there's a lot more than that. The 13th Amendment basically, it allowed black people to be free. So you can no longer hold someone as a slave, but there's a little twist in there.
There are exceptions, including criminals.
The loophole was immediately exploited.
The documentary takes us through all the different systems and, tricks and stuff that were put in place.
Khalif Browder was walking home from a party when he was stopped by police.
Then they said, we're going to take you to the precinct.
And make sure that they're in this prison system.
And most likely we're going to let you go home. And then I never went home.
So the documentary is in chronological order. She starts from Civil War, right after slavery was abolished, and how literally right after the Civil War, when people think, okay, this is the time for black people to be free and, move on with life, whatever that means. The 13th Amendment was passed. A lot of people were being imprisoned for very minor sentences. So if you were caught loitering, doing any kind of minor thing that they think is a crime, they put you in jail one time.
What you got after that was a rapid transition to a mythology of black criminality.
Birth of a Nation, which is a film that happened like in 1915, and how, film was used to paint African Americans in a certain light, as the criminals, as rapists, as bad people. And for me, seeing her mention that and later on in the film mentioned the media. So right now, you can't really approach filmmaking the same way Birth of a Nation approached it. As obviously racist, obviously targeting black people, because you will get, a lot of pushback from that. But the media is no different from what that movie was in terms of the way that black people are portrayed in media.
Animals, beasts that needed to be controlled.
You better believe it. I'm only human.
The media disproportionately represents black people as criminals, and they're the main people you see on all the headlines, even though statistically they aren't the most people committing a lot of those crimes.
The states were required to keep these prisons filled, even if nobody was committing a crime.
Corporations funding prisons, and make it. And if they're funding prisons, that means you have to keep the prisons full because they are privately owned and they need to make a profit.
It's so difficult to talk about mass incarceration because it has become heavily monetized.
So a lot of people who would provide food, a lot of people who need, prison labor, a lot of people who provide clothes for the prisons.
How much progress is it really if now there's a private company making money off the GPS monitor?
She mentioned the war on drugs and how
it became virtually impossible for a politician to run and appear soft on crime.
The kinds of kids that are called super predatory.
Crack cocaine was dealt with differently from powdered cocaine, and how if you were caught with crack, your sentence was automatically higher than if you were caught with powdered cocaine, because powdered cocaine was seen as a suburban drug. Meanwhile, it didn't matter if it was powder or crack. Both should have gotten the same sentence.
It was an enormous burden on the black community, but it also violated a sense of core fairness.
One major thing that stood out to me in terms of statistics, and I'm not going to give a lot out, but I really, really need people to know this. So, in the US, in the documentary it mentioned that in the US, 1 out of 17 white males will be sentenced for life. The statistics for black males is 1 out of 3. The population of black males in the US is 6.5%, and the population of black males in the prison system is 40.5%.
We now have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves back in the 1850s.
Just hearing those statistics alone, like there are even worse statistics in that documentary that will blow your mind and really let you know the scale of this system and how well thought out it is and still continues to be, and how difficult it really is to break this down. And I don't know, like a lot of those things were really, really shocking to me to hear. And, I know things were bad, but I didn't know it was that bad and that grossly obvious and that, in your face, we really don't care about y'all. We really don't care about y'all. And these are the statistics to show how much we don't care and how much, even if you question these things, is not going to change. It's definitely a must watch if you're not too familiar with anything happening in the States right now, if you're not too familiar with, just being an African American in the US. Trust me, this documentary is way more than just about prison reform. It's about a lot of things that we need to know to really fully understand how things are run and why people are protesting and why it's not that easy for us to just sit back and be docile and, speak to people nicely or try to get our point across nicely. Because when we really look back at it, all the important moments that happened in this documentary, the Civil War, which lasted for over 4 years, the Civil Rights Movement, Black Lives Matter even showed up. All of these things, all of these moments were able to bring about change. Anything that happened in between there that was just talking, just trying to get people to understand us, that didn't bring about change. It's only when people became violent, it's only when protests happened, when things were burning, when people were pushed up, when their backs were pushed against the wall, that was when change started happening. And I think what's happening right now is probably definitely a marker, something that we will look back in the future, look back at, and just like the Civil Rights Movement and just like the Civil War and just like all these other big movements, the Black Power movement, just like all these things happen, 2020 is definitely going to be one of those years. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I definitely think a lot of great things could come out from this, and it might not be the last time that this has to happen, because as you've seen, it happened years, decades before, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
I'm only human after all, don't put the blame on me.